In the heart of 19th-century Igboland, a young boy named Juboga was torn from his roots, sold into slavery, and thrown into the chaotic underbelly of Bonny, a major port in today's Nigeria. He was just a child, no kingdom, no family, no name, but within him burned a fire no chains could extinguish. While other slaves disappeared into obscurity, Jubo did the unthinkable. He clawed his way up the merchant hierarchy. Through brilliance, loyalty, and shrewd diplomacy, he gained freedom and quickly climbed the ranks of the powerful Anna Pepple House. The house was one of Bonny's elite trading groups, and Jubo soon became its face, taking the name Jaja. But Bonny was a kingdom boiling with rivalries. Two factions, Anna Pepple and Manila Pepple, clashed over trade rights, British alliances, and dominance. Jaja, ever the tactician, capitalized on the discord. In 1869, he led a defiant exodus and founded a new kingdom, Opobo, named after a former ancestral war deity. It was bold. It was audacious. And it was brilliant. Within a few short years, Jaja transformed this swampy riverine territory into a commercial empire. Traders flocked to Opobo, and Jaja's influence spread like wildfire across the delta. He wasn't just building a kingdom, he was rewriting what it meant to rule. A former slave was now king, commanding fleets, levying taxes, and negotiating with European superpowers as an equal. To the British, Jaja was a curiosity, an African who spoke their language, understood their games, and refused to be their pawn. But to Africans, he was hope incarnate. He was proof that from bondage could rise brilliance, and from betrayal could come boldness. Yet as Opobo flourished, the imperial eye of Britain began to narrow its focus. And the next move would be deadly. King Jaja's meteoric rise from shackles to sovereignty wasn't just rare, it was a direct challenge to empire. He had survived slavery, conquered rivals, and built an African superpower. But the British Empire had never tolerated black kings who played by their own rules. And they were just getting started. King Jaja didn't just build a kingdom, he engineered an economic fortress that shook the very foundations of British trade ambitions in West Africa. The 19th century was the age of palm oil imperialism, when industrial Europe's thirst for lubricants, soaps, and machine oils turned the Niger Delta into a goldmine. But unlike other African rulers who submitted to European firms, Jaja rewrote the rules. He banned British merchants from bypassing him to access interior markets and demanded that all trade pass through his control. That was blasphemy to British capitalism, and brilliance to African sovereignty. At the height of its power, Opobo exported more palm oil than any other Niger Delta kingdom, surpassing even Bonny. Jaja established diplomatic links with Liverpool, controlled over 18 key trading towns, and personally negotiated shipping rates with British firms. His royal fleet, yes, a fleet of armed canoes and trade vessels, patrolled the rivers like a private navy, ensuring no goods moved without his blessing. To London, this was not just a trading partner, it was a problem. British merchants, who once dominated Bonny, were now subject to customs duties, embargoes, and local taxes under Jaja's rule. They had to negotiate, not dictate. And worse, Jaja started exporting palm oil directly to Britain, cutting out middlemen entirely. This sent shockwaves through British chambers of commerce. How could a black king, a former slave no less, outmaneuver one of the world's most powerful empires, economically? Jaja's brilliance wasn't just in wealth creation. It was in the way he combined traditional African leadership with Western business acumen. He understood maritime law. He read British contracts. He spoke their language, literally and politically. And above all, he knew that economic power was the last shield between sovereignty and colonization. The more Opobo prospered, the more Britain's claws scratched for a way in. By the 1880s, Jaja was more than a king, he was an African oil tycoon in a world ruled by European monopolies. But empires don't tolerate competition. Especially not from Africans who refuse to bow. The British weren't just losing profits, they were losing control. And so, under the mask of diplomacy, they began to plot his downfall. By the mid-1880s, Jaja had become too powerful, too independent, and too unyielding for the British Empire to ignore. His insistence on full control of trade routes, his refusal to sign British-imposed treaties, and his economic genius made him a direct threat to their colonial expansion. Britain's answer: disguise ambition as diplomacy, and betrayal as policy. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 had divided Africa like slices of cake among European powers, and Britain had been granted the Niger Delta. But Jaja didn't get that memo, and he had no plans to submit. British officials, led by Consul Hewitt and Vice-Consul Harry Johnston, began crafting a web of deceit. They tried to force Jaja to sign treaties of protection that would hand over his sovereignty. He refused. He knew their game too well. Jaja saw what had happened to other kings who surrendered their authority, reduced to puppets, dethroned, or disappeared. So, he held firm. But the empire was patient and ruthless. When words failed, they turned to traps. In 1887, the British made their move. Vice-Consul Johnston invited King Jaja aboard the British gunboat Goshawk under the guise of peaceful negotiations. Jaja, trusting his relationship with the crown and unaware of the setup, accepted. But the moment he set foot on that ship, the trap snapped shut. He was arrested, without trial, without warning, and without dignity. His kingdom had just been decapitated by deceit. The people of Opobo were stunned. Their king, their protector, their trade mastermind, had vanished in the blink of an eye. The British, with their usual flair for moral justification, accused Jaja of obstructing commerce, branding him an outlaw in his own land. They claimed he was a tyrant. But history knows the truth. Jaja's only crime was defying empire with intellect and integrity. With Jaja gone, British warships sailed into Opobo unopposed. The kingdom was annexed, customs dismantled, and trade handed over to British companies. The dream Jaja built, of African-controlled wealth and sovereignty, was plundered overnight. But the story wasn't over. Exile awaited him. And the empire wasn't done twisting the knife. Stripped of his kingdom and dignity, King Jaja was hauled across the Atlantic like a common criminal, first to Accra, then to the island of St. Vincent in the Caribbean. The irony was brutal: a former slave, now a king, once again exiled across oceans. But this time, it wasn't the chains of African traders or European slavers, it was British colonial justice. In a farcical tribunal, Jaja was found guilty of obstructing free trade and exiled for what they called his own safety. But the world wasn't fooled. News of his arrest sparked outrage across West Africa and Britain alike. African merchants protested. British MPs questioned the legality of the arrest. Even Queen Victoria, reportedly shocked by the treachery, began to hear whispers of injustice. From his tropical prison, Jaja wrote letters, diplomatic, fiery, articulate. He didn't beg. He demanded his right to return, to see Opobo, to defend his honor. In his writings, you still see the king, proud, strategic, unbroken. By 1891, public pressure became impossible to ignore. Britain reluctantly agreed to repatriate him. But freedom was a mirage. On his return voyage, Jaja made it only as far as the Canary Islands. There, he mysteriously died. Official reports claimed natural causes, but many suspected poison. The timing was too convenient. His death solved a colonial problem. The symbol of black resistance would never return to reclaim his throne. Jaja's body was buried far from Opobo. The empire ensured that the man they couldn't defeat alive wouldn't rise again in death. Or so they thought. Back in Opobo, mourning turned into rage, and rage into myth. The river whispered stories that Jaja would one day return. Some claimed his soul became one with the Bonny River. Others believed the British feared him even in death. His throne stood empty, but his name became legend. Jaja wasn't just a king anymore, he was a martyr, a symbol of stolen freedom, and the face of African betrayal by Western hypocrisy. The exile of King Jaja wasn't just a chapter of injustice, it was a calculated assassination of African excellence. His was a voice the empire couldn't afford to let echo. But like all great legends, Jaja's spirit outlived his killers. And in the flames of colonial conquest, a deeper truth ignited, one that refuses to die. King Jaja may have been buried in foreign soil, but his spirit never left Opobo. In the hearts of his people, and across the African continent, his name became synonymous with dignity, defiance, and brilliance. To this day, statues of Jaja stand proudly in Opobo, a kingdom that still honors his memory with festivals, oral traditions, and ancestral reverence. His legacy lives in the very air of the Niger Delta, a silent but unyielding echo of resistance that no British gunboat could sink. Far beyond Nigeria, Jaja's name is now studied in universities, celebrated by Pan-African scholars, and revered by freedom fighters who see in him the template of African sovereignty. He is proof that leadership does not require colonial validation, that brilliance does not wear a European crown. He was a king who understood trade, diplomacy, and power, and wielded them with elegance, not violence. And for that, he was taken down. But not erased. In modern-day Nigeria, Jaja's story is undergoing a renaissance. Streets are named after him. His image appears in art, music, and history books. In classrooms and town halls, young Africans are asking new questions. Why was he betrayed? Why did Britain fear him so deeply? And what would Africa look like if more Jajas had been allowed to lead freely? These questions don't just honor Jaja, they confront the silence of empire. What makes Jaja's story so gripping is that it mirrors the arc of African history itself: stolen beginnings, defiant rises, imperial betrayal, and eternal resilience. He embodies the unbroken chain between past and present. And in an era where African voices are reclaiming space and narrative, Jaja stands tall, not just as a fallen king, but as an enduring symbol of what Africa once was, and what it can be again. So the next time you hear about colonialism, remember, it wasn't just about land. It was about silencing kings like Jaja. And yet, here we are. Telling his story, reviving his name, and restoring his crown. They took the man. But they could never bury the spirit. King Jaja of Opobo wasn't just a monarch, he was a movement. A once enslaved boy who rose to become a king, a defender of his people, and a defier of empire. His story is soaked in courage, soaked in betrayal, and soaked in the bloodless war he waged against colonial greed. Through sheer intellect and strategic brilliance, he conquered not just rival merchant houses, but an entire British trading system that sought to reduce African kingdoms to pawns. His humanitarian efforts shielded his people from exploitation, his political policies redefined sovereignty, and his refusal to sign away freedom echoes louder now than ever. Jaja's defiance reshaped the narrative of African resistance, not with swords, but with law, economics, and unshakable pride. Though he was exiled and silenced, his legacy broke the chains of invisibility cast over African greatness. He may have died in foreign hands, but he lives in African hearts. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to the brilliance buried beneath colonial lies, like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, share it with others, and subscribe for more hidden histories that were never meant to be forgotten. This is our history. Let's reclaim it, one truth at a time.